He didn't wake from pain. There was no pain yet, but the fear was working flawlessly. He woke from a sound, that characteristic, soul-chilling metallic clink of steel on an enameled surgical tray. Autumn, 1952. The deafening silence of a basement in an abandoned boiler room in a closed-off Urals town. This guy, tied irrevocably to an old, decommissioned operating table, was Viktor Rakitin, son of the city's first secretary. A golden boy, the true king of life. Just yesterday, he was drinking expensive cognac, laughing, certain the whole world lay at his feet. He thought his loud surname was armor no Soviet law could pierce. But now he stared with animal terror into the eyes of the woman leaning over him. Her hands didn't tremble. Her eyes held no hatred. They held something much more frightening, a cold, professional interest. She held the scalpel as confidently as if it were a violin bow. She leaned to his ear and whispered something that made his insides turn to ice. "Don't squirm, Vitya. I know anatomy better than you know your multiplication tables. One extra move, and I'll nick the femoral artery. You'll bleed out in 3 minutes, and I need you to live and remember." Viktor tried to scream, but a dense gag muffled the cry. He felt the cold steel low on his abdomen and understood what was about to happen. In 5 minutes, he would cease to be a man forever. How did an ordinary woman, a modest morgue attendant, become the worst nightmare for the town's elite? Why did the police, even suspecting who was doing it, fear to touch her? And was it true her vengeance was so medically refined that even seasoned detectives fainted at the crime scene? We'll tell a story that chills the blood, a story about what happens when the law protects scum, not the victims. Friends, YouTube algorithms don't like such honest and harsh topics, often hiding them from recommendations. So right now, hit the subscribe button and be sure to like this video. This is your contribution to the fight for justice, and a guarantee that we will continue to speak the truth. Done? Then get ready. It's going to hurt. To understand how a person reaches such extreme cruelty, you must look into their past. Antonina Petrovna wasn't an ordinary Soviet auntie, as her neighbors thought. The whole town knew her simply as Tonka from the morgue. She was 45, but looked a full 60. Wiry, with hands etched by grime and bleach. Her job was the dirtiest labor, washing corpses, stitching them after autopsies, cleaning what remained on the dissection tables. Local hooligans gave her a wide berth. She carried the chill of the grave and formaldehyde. But few knew who Antonina had been before. 1942. Stalingrad, a field hospital. Antonina, the head operating nurse. For days on end, without sleep or rest under bombardment, she stood at the table. She saw things they don't show in heroic war films. Severed limbs, human flesh, gangrenous stumps. Sometimes, when surgeons collapsed from exhaustion, she took the scalpel and she cut swiftly, precisely, coldly. She knew how to separate dead flesh from living to save the body. Blood for her was just a fluid to be wiped with a rag. The war burned everything out of her. Fear, disgust, pity. Returning home, she buried her husband, who died from wounds, and was left alone with her little daughter. Lenochka, the only bright spot in her life, blackened and reeking of death. In 1952, Lenochka turned 18. Slender, pale, with huge, naive eyes, she studied at a music college. She was the complete opposite of her mother. Antonina smelled of bleach and tobacco. Lenochka, of Krasnaya Moskva perfume and book dust. The mother guarded her like a crystal vase. She worked double shifts, hauled heavy corpses, just so Lenochka could have new little shoes, just so she'd never know need. "You'll be an artist, Lenka. You won't wash rotting flesh like your mother," Antonina would say. She thought the worst was behind her. She was wrong. The war had simply changed form. The enemy now wore not a German uniform, but fashionable jackets and komsomol pins. The town had its own elite. In the early 50s, while ordinary workers stood in breadlines. These guys already lived under communism. They were called majors. Viktor Rakitin, son of the city committee secretary, expelled from 2 institutes, but drove his father's Pobeda car. Stas Voronov, son of the regional prosecutor, a boxer, a sadist who loved beating people just for sport. And the third, Valera Kozlov, nicknamed the Weasel, son of the head of the trade department, a petty, nasty coward who always egged the leaders on to do vile things. They held the entire district in fear. If they wanted a girl, they took her. The police saluted them. Any complaint against them vanished before it reached a file folder. Write in the comments if you've ever encountered such untouchables in your town. The feeling of powerlessness before them is familiar to many. Evening, November 4th. Pre-holiday bustle. Lenochka was returning from a rehearsal, clutching a folder of sheet music to her chest. It was dark. Streetlights on the outskirts worked only every other one. A black Pobeda crept up slowly from behind. Like a predatory beast, the door opened, and a drunk Rakitin tumbled out. "Whoa, what a little doll. Miss, do you like music?" Lenochka quickened her pace. Her heart pounded in her throat. She knew who this was. "Now don't rush, princess. We'll give you a ride. Deliver you with some flair." Voronov guffawed, clambering out next. They surrounded her. A boxer's heavy palm covered her mouth. They dragged her into the car. The folder with sheet music fell into the dirty autumn snow. There were witnesses. A janitor saw, a neighbor saw. But no one came out. No one called the police. Fear. A sticky animal fear of authority paralyzed people. The city's silence signed Lenochka's sentence. Antonina didn't sleep all night. A mother's instinct screamed of trouble. By 5 in the morning, she was already at the police station, but the duty officer just yawned. "Mother, go home. Your girl's out partying. Young blood, holidays, and all." Antonina understood there would be no help. She started searching herself. She went through yards, basements, attics. By afternoon, she reached the abandoned garages near the meatpacking plant. A desolate, bad place. And there she found her. Lenochka lay on a pile of construction debris. Her clothes were torn to shreds. Her face was barely visible from the hematomas. But she was alive, barely breathing. Antonina didn't scream. The reflex of a frontline nurse kicked in. She fell to her knees and with a professional gaze assessed the damage. Broken ribs, concussion, multiple tears. She saw cigarette burns on her daughter's stomach. They had stubbed them out on her. They didn't just rape her, they tortured her, they had fun. For them, it was a game. A way to feel their boundless power. Antonina lifted her daughter in her arms. Lenochka, who weighed only 45 kilograms, now seemed weightless, like a broken doll. "Mama," she whispered through broken lips. "Mama, I'm dirty. Wash me." At the hospital, an old surgeon who knew Antonina from the front didn't lie. "Tonya, she'll live, but she'll never have children. Everything there is destroyed. And her psyche. She stares at the wall and doesn't blink. I've only seen that in soldiers after severe shell shock." In the evening, a young investigator, Sokolov, the only one who agreed to take her statement, entered the ward. He fidgeted and avoided her eyes. "Antonina Petrovna, the witnesses have recanted. Everyone's afraid. Tonya, withdraw the complaint. They won't pursue it. Rakitin Sr. has already called the bosses. If you make noise, you'll be jailed for slander, and Lena will be put in an asylum. Have pity on your daughter." Sokolov left, leaving Antonina alone in the silent ward. She looked at her hands. Hands that had pulled thousands of people back from the other side. At that moment, something died in Antonina. The mother died. The obedient Soviet citizen died. The same Tonya from 42 awoke in her. Tonya, who could coldly cut away rotten flesh to save the body. She understood. This town is sick. It's infected with gangrene, and the name of that gangrene is impunity. The law doesn't work. Fine. Then there will be an operation. An amputation. Antonina got up and didn't go home. She went to work at the morgue. She needed to prepare her instruments. They wanted to play at being men. She whispered into the emptiness of the cold corridor. Well then, they will cease to be. Revenge is a dish best served cold. But for Antonina, it wasn't just a dish. It was the most complex surgical operation, requiring sterility, precision, and an absolute absence of emotion. Returning to work at the morgue, she stopped being a grief-stricken mother. She became the head operating nurse of a field hospital again. Her movements became economical and precise, her gaze glassy. Colleagues thought she was numb with grief, but in reality, she was calculating dosages. She needed a weapon, not a pistol, a knife, or an axe. Those were butcher's tools. She was a medic. Her weapon was pharmacology. In the locked cabinet of the pathologist were drugs used for tissue fixation and potent muscle relaxants, substances that relax muscles to complete paralysis. Antonina knew that with the right mix, a person becomes a living doll. They see everything, hear everything, understand everything, feel pain, but cannot move even a finger. They cannot scream because the vocal cords are paralyzed. It was the perfect anesthesia for her purposes. Anesthesia in reverse. She stole 3 ampules, 3 syringes, and a set of scalpels made of German trophy steel she had kept since 1943. They were razor sharp. Every night, while her daughter slept under sedatives, Antonina sharpened her tools. Whisk, whisk, whisk. That sound in the quiet apartment was like a countdown for those 3. For the next 2 weeks, Antonina led a double life. By day, she mopped floors at the morgue and fed her daughter with a spoon. By evening, she put on an old man's padded jacket, pulled a cap over her eyes, and became a shadow. She studied her enemies. She tracked them like an experienced hunter tracks man-eating wolves. She learned their schedules, their habits, their fears, and she quickly understood who in this pack was the weakest link. Valera Kozlov, nicknamed the Weasel, son of the trade director. Small, fidgety, perpetually sweaty. Without his protector friends, he was nobody. He was a coward. After the incident with Lena, he became jumpy, drank heavily, constantly looked over his shoulder. Apparently conscience, or rather fear of retribution, gnawed at his rotten little soul. Antonina chose him first. It's good to practice on small predators before hunting big game. Wednesday, the day when Rakitin and Voronov went to the regional center to party, and Valera stayed in town. He usually sat in a dive bar near the train station, drowning his eyes with cheap beer and vodka. Antonina waited for him at the exit. A thick November fog hung in the air. A raw, penetrating wind chilled to the bone. Perfect weather for an operation. Around midnight, Valera stumbled out of the bar. He swayed, muttered to himself, and decided to cut through a wasteland behind the garages. A fatal mistake. Antonina materialized from the fog silently, like a ghost. Valera didn't even have time to be scared. He saw a figure in a padded jacket, wanted to shout something, but felt a sharp prick in his neck. A thin needle entered the vein precisely. You can't drink away the experience of thousands of frontline injections. Quiet, patient, quiet. She whispered in his ear with her professional, calming voice. The drug acted instantly. Valera's legs turned to cotton, his tongue useless. He slumped into the mud, staring at her with wide, terror-filled eyes. He wanted to scream, "Help!" but only a quiet gurgle escaped his throat. His body shut down, but his brain continued working with feverish clarity. Antonina, despite her age and thinness, was wiry and strong. Years of hauling corpses and wounded had hardened her. She heaved the limp body of the guy onto a garden cart she'd hidden in the bushes and wheeled him, not far, to that very basement of the abandoned boiler room she had prepared in advance. It was damp, smelled of mold and rats, but for Antonina, it was an operating room. She tied him to the table tightly, securely, pulled down his pants. Valera lay there and cried. Tears rolled down his temples into his ears, but his face remained an immobile mask. Antonina turned on a dim bulb. She put on rubber gloves, laid out her instruments on a clean cloth. Everything was sterile. She even wiped the site of the future operation with alcohol. She didn't want him to die from sepsis. She needed him to live. She leaned over him. Her face in the lamplight seemed carved from stone. Valery Pavlovich Kozlov, she pronounced, as if reading a case history. Diagnosis: acute hypersexuality, complicated by sadism and a sense of impunity. Medical history: participation in gang rape. Prognosis: unfavorable. Radical surgical intervention recommended. She looked directly into his pupils. Do you understand what I'm saying? Blink if you understand. Valera blinked. In that blink was a plea for mercy, a promise of money, connections, anything. Don't bargain, Valera. You took from my daughter the ability to be a woman, to be a mother. You broke her nature. I'm simply restoring the balance. I'll take from you what you harmed her with. This isn't revenge. It's therapy. She took the scalpel. Steel flashed. It will hurt, Valera. I have no Novocaine for you. Well, I do, but I decided not to waste it. You must feel every millimeter of the pain you caused her. What happened over the next 20 minutes is hard to describe in words. Antonina didn't work like a maniac butcher hacking a victim in rage. No, she worked like a surgeon. Precise incisions, clamps, sutures. She was removing the source of the disease methodically and coldly. Valera Kozlov died and was resurrected from pain 1,000 times. But his paralyzed body couldn't even shudder. Only his eyes, bloodshot, rolled in their sockets, pleading for death. Finishing, she treated the wounds, applied a sterile bandage. The operation was successful, she said, removing her bloody gloves. Will you live? Yes. Have children? No. Rape? No. You are now safe for society. You are now a eunuch, Valera. Live with that. She injected him with the antidote so his muscles would start working, but left him tied up. She called an ambulance from a payphone on the corner, disguising her voice, and melted into the night. In the morning, the town exploded with rumors. Paramedics, responding to the call at the boiler room, found the son of the trade director tied to a table. He was howling. He didn't speak. He just howled on a single note, staring at the ceiling. When the doctors saw what had been done to him, even the seasoned medic ran outside to vomit. It was jewelry work. No extra blood. Everything neatly removed and stitched up. At the hospital, Valera's father, party officials, and police rushed to him. Who did this? His father shook him by the shoulders. Who? Valera trembled with a fine shiver. He couldn't speak. He wrote on a piece of paper just one word. Doctor. Investigator Sokolov, the same young lieutenant who had refused to open Antonina's case, looked at the forensic report. The nature of the injuries indicates the operation was performed by a person with professional surgical skills. The instrument is a medical scalpel. Wound edges are even. Sokolov went cold. The puzzle pieces clicked in his head. He remembered the eyes of the mother he had denied help. He remembered her hands, dry, sinewy hands, etched with bleach. Doctor or nurse, operating nurse, raced through his mind. He understood who did it, but he also understood something else. There was no evidence, and he felt a strange, frightening feeling, a feeling of satisfaction. One down, he thought, and immediately was scared by that thought. But Antonina wasn't planning to stop. One is too few. The Hydra has 3 heads. And the next head was far more dangerous than the cowardly Valera. Stas Voronov, boxer, son of the prosecutor. A beast that senses danger. Hunting him would be harder. Trickery wouldn't work here. This would require strength and bait. Antonina knew what this beast bit on. Fear and lust, and she was ready to play this deadly game with him. The town froze in anticipation. The rumor about what happened to the trade director's son spread faster than a typhus epidemic. Official reports were silent. Newspapers said nothing. But in kitchens, queues, and factory smoking areas, they whispered only about one thing. An Avenger has appeared in town. No one knew who it was. A man, a woman, or a whole gang. They only knew the signature. Medical precision and terrible Old Testament justice. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Or in this case, manhood for maidenhood. But if ordinary people smirked with schadenfreude, feeling justice had finally triumphed, the wolf pack grew nervous. Viktor Rakitin and Stas Voronov understood. The hunt had begun. Stas Voronov, son of the regional prosecutor, was different. He wasn't a coward like Valera. He was a bull, 100 kilograms of solid muscle, regional boxing champion, an aggressive sociopath, confident in his impunity. When he learned of Valera's fate, he didn't hide. On the contrary, he flew into a rage. "Whoever this is, I'll smear them against a wall," he growled, smashing a punching bag in the gym. "Let them just come near. I'll rip their guts out." He believed in the power of his fists. He thought physical might would protect him from any enemy. Antonina knew this. She observed him. She saw him leaving the gym, flexing his muscles, looking at passers-by with the gaze of a master of life. She understood. He's not like Valera. You can't stun him, can't scare him. You can't approach him in a dark alley. He'd react faster, strike to kill. You don't go after a bear with just a spear, she thought, sorting through ampules in her stash. You trap a bear, or strike when it sleeps in its den. She chose a place where even the strongest beast becomes vulnerable, a place where he removes his armor, the showers of the Dynamo Sports Complex. Stas had a habit of training late at night when the gym was empty. He loved being alone, enjoying the sound of his punches in the silence. After training, he showered for a long time, washing off sweat and blood, often other people's, as he didn't spare his sparring partners. Antonina studied the cleaner's schedule. She knew that on Tuesdays and Fridays, Baba Masha was on duty, a nearsighted old woman who often slacked off and left early, leaving the keys under the mat in the supply closet. Friday, November 13th. An ominous date, but Antonina didn't believe in omens. She believed in pharmacology. This time she needed something stronger than muscle relaxants. She needed a drug that would knock out an elephant. She prepared a cocktail, a mix of a powerful tranquilizer and a cardiac depressant. Dangerous. A slight overdose and the heart stops. But she didn't care. If he survives, good. If he croaks, that's where he belongs. Around 11 at night, Stas Voronov stood under a hot shower. Water drummed on the tiles. Steam blurred his vision. He was relaxed, confident, humming some criminal tune. He didn't hear the door creak. Antonina entered the shower room in a blue cleaner's smock, with a bucket and mop. She clanged the bucket deliberately loudly. Stas turned around, but seeing a hunched figure with a mop, immediately lost interest. For people like him, service staff weren't people. They were furniture, empty space. "Hey, Granny, get out of here. Can't you see I'm washing?" he barked, not covering himself. Antonina shuffled closer, pretending to mop the floor. "Just a moment, Sonny, just a moment. Let me wipe this spot," she wheezed, imitating an old woman's voice. She closed in on him like a cobra. 1 meter, half a meter. Stas turned away, putting his face under the stream of water. His powerful neck, bulging with muscles, was exposed. A perfect target. Antonina straightened up. In her hand, instead of a rag, flashed a syringe with a long needle. The strike was lightning fast. She drove the needle deep into the trapezius muscle and pressed the plunger all the way. Stas roared. He spun around with incredible speed, swinging his fist for a killing blow. If he had connected, he would have taken Antonina's head off. But the drug, injected directly into a muscle warmed by exercise, with a high pulse, spread through his bloodstream instantly. His arm froze in midair, his legs buckled. The 100-kilo giant crashed onto the wet tiles with the sound of a falling wardrobe. He tried to get up. He wheezed, drooled. His eyes filled with blood from rage and incomprehension. Antonina stood over him, looking down. She removed the fake shawl. "Strength is useless without brains, eh, Stasik?" she asked in her usual cold voice. "You're used to hitting the weak. You're used to being feared. Now look at yourself. You're lying in your own filth at the feet of an old woman. Where's your strength now, champion?" She didn't drag him to the basement. It was impossible. He was too heavy. She decided to operate right there, in the shower. Antiseptic be damned. It would add to his suffering in the post-operative period. She turned off the water. A ringing silence fell, broken only by the heavy, wheezing breath of the paralyzed giant. Antonina pulled from the bucket not a rag, but her bundle of instruments. "Did you love using your organ as a weapon, Stas?" she said, cutting his shorts with scissors. "You thought you had the right to stick it wherever you wanted, without asking permission? Well then, the weapon is confiscated," Stas Voronov cried. For the first time in his life, this beast cried. He understood what was happening, but couldn't even move a finger. He saw the gleam of the scalpel in the light of the dim shower lamps. Antonina worked quickly, roughly. With Valera, she had been careful, almost gentle. With Stas, she didn't stand on ceremony. She cut harshly, applied sutures with rough stitches, not caring about cosmetic effect. "Does it hurt?" she asked, seeing his eyelid twitch. "Endure it, hero. It hurt the girl too, only she could scream, and you can't even whimper." Finishing, she wrote in green disinfectant on his forehead, "For Lena." It was a mistake, an emotional outburst. Until now, she hadn't left clues, hadn't left messages, but fury overflowed in her. This inscription became the first thread for the investigation. She left, leaving him lying on the cold tile in a puddle of blood and water. In the morning, the cleaner, Baba Masha, coming on shift, found the champion. His scream, when his voice returned, was probably heard even out on the street. The town shuddered. The second case in a week. And the victim, the son of the prosecutor. Untouchable, the system howled. Prosecutor Voronov Sr., seeing what had been done to his only heir, declared war. The entire police force was put on alert. The town was cordoned off. Raids began. They grabbed anyone suspicious, anyone with a record, anyone who looked sideways. But Investigator Sokolov, looking at the photos from the crime scene, wasn't thinking about raids. He was looking at the sutures. That knot again, he thought. A sailor's knot? No, a surgical one. Old school. They sewed like that in field hospitals in '42, when there weren't enough threads and the seam had to hold for dear life, even if the soldier crawled through mud. And the inscription, "For Lena." Sokolov closed his eyes. The picture came together completely. Lena, that same girl whose statement he had rejected 2 weeks ago. He pulled the file. Mother, Antonina Petrovna Makarova. Place of work, city morgue. During the war, head operating nurse of evacuation hospital number 13. Bingo. Sokolov sat in his office and smoked. His hands shook. He knew who it was. He knew where she lived. He could go right now and arrest her, get a promotion to major, a bonus, gratitude from the prosecutor. But before his eyes flashed the face of that beaten girl in the hospital and the face of her mother, black with grief. They ceased to be men, he whispered. And me? Am I a man, or am I also part of this rot? At that moment, the phone rang. It was Rakitin Sr., the first secretary of the city committee. "Sokolov, have you found this scum? My Vitya is next. I can feel it. Assign him a guard, your best men, to my house. If a single hair falls from my son's head, I'll grind you into camp dust." Sokolov hung up. The third one, Viktor Rakitin, the ringleader. The investigator understood Antonina would come for him. Rakitin was now locked in his father's mansion, under police guard and armed men. It was a fortress. How could a lone woman reach him? It was suicide. She was going to certain death. Sokolov stood up. He had to stop her. Or help her. He himself didn't yet know the answer. He just put on his service cap, took his service weapon, and drove not to the city committee, but to Antonina's house. But he was too late. The apartment door was unlocked. Inside, no one. Only a note on the table. "Don't look for me. I'm going to finish the job." And at that time, Antonina stood in the shadow of the trees opposite the Rakitin mansion. She saw the guards. She saw the lights in the windows. She knew Vitya was in there, trembling with fear and drinking cognac. She understood a syringe and scalpel wouldn't help here. You couldn't bypass the guard. But she had a plan. A plan worthy not of a nurse, but of a saboteur. A plan in which she herself might not survive. She stroked the cold metal in her pocket. This time it wasn't a scalpel. It was a canister of ether she had taken from the laboratory, and a lighter. "Cleansing by fire," she whispered. "The most reliable disinfection." At 2 a.m, the Rakitin mansion resembled a sleeping dragon that doesn't even close its eyes in sleep. Searchlights swept the perimeter, picking tree trunks and empty benches out of the darkness. At the gates, militiamen in sheepskin coats shifted from foot to foot. The November night chilled to the bone. They smoked, hiding the glowing tips in their sleeves, quietly cursing their superiors. None of them believed some mythical gang of Avengers would dare show up here, in the very heart of Soviet power. They expected a truck with armed men, a battering ram, an armed assault. They did not expect a lone, stooped figure who slid silently to the back gate from the direction of the abandoned garages. Antonina acted quickly. Her hands didn't tremble. She felt for the lock, old, rusty, just as Investigator Sokolov had said. A knife blade slid into the gap, pressed the latch. Click. The gate gave way. The path to the garden was open, but it was only the first line of defense. Ahead were the dogs, 2 huge German shepherds, trained to tear people apart. Antonina heard their heavy breathing in the kennel. She pulled a bundle from her pocket. Meat, fresh cutlets, which she had generously laced with sleeping pills, the same kind prescribed to violent patients in the psychiatric ward. She tossed the meat over the netting. The dogs, forgetting their training, pounced on the food. 5 minutes later, silence reigned in the kennel. The guards on the towers noticed nothing. The wind blew from their direction. Now the main phase, ventilation. Antonina made her way to the back wall of the house, where a black grate marked the air intake for the coal heating boiler room. The old heating system that pushed warm air through pipes into all the rooms. A perfect delivery system. She took out her homemade smoke bombs, tin cans with a hellish mix of sulfur and glycerin. Struck a lighter, the fuses hissed. Antonina tossed the cans inside the air duct and quickly covered the grate with a piece of tarpaulin so the draft went only into the house. A minute later, the medicine began to work. First came the smell, acrid, chemical, nauseating. The smell of sulfur and soot, instantly filling the basement and starting to rise to the first floor. Then smoke poured out, thick, yellowish white. It oozed from the ventilation grills in the living room, the corridors, the bedrooms. Like a poisonous snake, panic erupted in the house. "Fire! We're on fire!" A woman's shrill scream cut the silence. It was the housekeeper. The guards inside the house rushed about. The smoke stung their eyes, caused wild coughing fits from the acridity in their throats. Visibility dropped to 0. "Everyone out! Get the first secretary out!" shouted the head of security, trying to see the way to the doors through his tears. The front doors burst open. Coughing people spilled onto the porch. The first secretary Rakitin himself in just a robe, supported by guards, his wife, servants. "Vitya! Where's Vitya?" his mother screamed, trying to rush back into the smoke-filled house. "He locked himself in. He won't open," his father yelled. "Break the door! Get him out!" 2 guards, pulling wet rags over their faces, rushed back into the house. But the smoke was so thick the panic so great that in this chaos, no one noticed a shadow moving not towards the exit, but away from it, deeper into the house, against the flow. Antonina had put on her old gauze mask, soaked in vinegar, a proven remedy against smoke since the First World War. She walked through this hell calmly, without fuss. She knew the house's layout. She knew where to go. Second floor. Oak door at the end of the corridor. She went up the stairs while the guards downstairs ran around aimlessly with buckets, trying to find the source of the fire. Here it was. The Citadel. Viktor's room. Behind the door, coughing and hysterical sobs were heard. Viktor Rakitin wasn't opening. He thought the fire was a trick, that she had set the house on fire to smoke him out. "I won't come out! I won't!" he squealed, choking on the smoke seeping under the door. He huddled in a corner, pressing a wet towel to his face. In his hand, he clutched his father's pistol, but his hands shook so badly he almost dropped the weapon. The smoke burned his eyes, his head swam. He felt he was already in hell, that devils had come for him, and that smell of sulfur. That was the smell of their breath. Suddenly the lock clicked. No, it wasn't broken down. It simply opened. Quietly, softly. Viktor raised the pistol. In the doorway, in the swirls of white smoke, stood a figure. It seemed enormous. A black cap, a white mask over the mouth and nose. The eyes above the mask stared at him unblinking. Icy, dead eyes. "Mama," Vitya babbled deliriously. "Is that you?" The figure stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. The noise and shouts from outside immediately became muffled. "No, Vitya, I'm not your mama, I'm the doctor." The voice sounded muffled from under the mask. Viktor pulled the trigger. Click, a misfire. Either he'd forgotten to take off the safety, or he'd run out of bullets while shooting at shadows the night before. He threw the pistol at the figure but missed. Antonina approached slowly, inexorably, like death itself. Viktor tried to stand, to run, to scream, but his legs got tangled in a blanket. He collapsed onto the carpet, crawling on his knees, coughing and whining. "Don't, please, I have money. Papa, I'll give you anything." Antonina stepped her heavy tarpaulin boot onto his hand. Fingers crunched. Viktor howled, but immediately choked on a coughing fit. She leaned over him. In her hand was not a scalpel. In her hand was a rag, an ordinary coarse rag from which came a sharp, sweetish smell. Ether. "Quiet, patient, don't struggle. We'll cure you now, give you a rabies shot." She pressed the rag to his face. Viktor thrashed, scratched her hands, tried to bite, but the forces were unequal. He was exhausted by fear, alcohol, and smoke. She was filled with iron resolve. A minute later, his convulsions weakened. His eyes rolled back. His body went limp. Antonina threw the rag aside. Now he slept a deep, narcotic sleep. The smoke in the room began to clear. The wind had changed, pulling the soot out the window, but time was short. The guards would break down the door soon, realizing Viktor wasn't coming out. She had 5 minutes at most. Antonina took her kit from her bag. This time she didn't lay out the instruments on a cloth. There was no time for sterility. She cut his silk pajama bottoms. "You were the main one, Vitya. You were the head," she whispered, looking at his unconscious face. "But you didn't think with your head. You thought with this." She brought the scalpel close. This wasn't just an operation. It was an execution, symbolic and irreversible. She worked quickly, even more roughly than with the previous ones. She had to finish before they burst into the room. Blood gushed onto the expensive Persian carpet, mixing with soot. "Gangrene removed," Antonina pronounced, applying the final suture. In the corridor, stomping and blows on the door were heard. Break it down, you bastards!" Rakitin Sr.'s voice. Antonina wiped her hands on the bedspread. She ran to the window, second floor, high up. But below the window grew an old oak, its branches reaching right up to the balcony. She opened the frame. Cold night air hit her face. Before disappearing into the darkness, she turned and looked at Viktor one last time. He lay on the floor, pale, in a puddle of blood, but alive. A living monument to her justice. "Live and remember," she threw into the void. That same second, the door flew off its hinges. Guards with flashlights burst into the room. "Viktor Sergeyevich!" They saw the body. They saw the blood. They saw the open window where an oak branch swayed. "She's here! She went out the window! After her!" roared the head of security, running to the balcony and firing blindly into the darkness. A burst of automatic fire cut the night with tracers, but the bullets flew into emptiness. Antonina, scraping her hands and knees, had already slid down the tree trunk and was running towards that same hole in the fence left for her by the investigator. She ran across the wet grass, hearing barking dogs, shouts, sirens behind her. It seemed hell itself was chasing her. Her heart hammered in her throat. A stitch stabbed her side. Her lungs burned with fire, but she didn't stop. She knew if she reached the river, she was saved. She dove into the icy November water, throwing the dogs off her trail. The current picked her up, carried her away from the cursed house, from the lights, from the blood. She swam and cried. For the first time in all this, she cried. But these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of cleansing. It was over. The debt was paid. Antonina climbed ashore only near dawn, soaked, chilled to the bone, her hands torn and bloody. She resembled not a human, but a shadow. She reached her house while the town still slept. Quietly opened the door with her key. The apartment smelled of medicine and silence. Lena was sleeping. Antonina stood for a long time under a hot shower in the bathroom, trying to wash off the smell of soot, river slime, and someone else's blood. She scrubbed her skin with a washcloth until it was red, as if wanting to peel off this layer of life. Then she burned her clothes in the potbelly stove. The black cap, the boots, everything turned to ash. With them, that terrible nighttime Antonina turned to ash as well. In the morning, the ordinary, quiet morgue attendant Petrovna went to work. None of her colleagues noticed that her hands trembled slightly more than usual, and her gaze had become completely empty, and the town buzzed. The news of what happened at the Rakitin mansion couldn't be hidden. Too many witnesses, too loud the screams, too much smoke. Viktor Rakitin survived. Doctors saved his life, but not his manhood. What Antonina did to him was irreversible. He became an invalid. But the worst punishment awaited him not in the hospital ward, but beyond it. Rumors destroyed him. Eunuch. Empty shell. Not a man. These nicknames stuck to him for good. Friends turned away from him. Girls who used to hang on his neck for money and connections now wrinkled their noses in disgust. He became an outcast. His father sent him to a closed sanatorium in Crimea, far from prying eyes, where Viktor drank himself to death and died 5 years later from cirrhosis of the liver. Never having regained his senses, Rakitin Sr.'s career collapsed overnight. Moscow didn't like scandals. Father of a castrated rapist was a stain on the party's reputation. He was removed from his post for health reasons, stripped of privileges, his dacha, and his personal car. He lived out his days in an ordinary apartment, cursing the day he gave his son a sense of total impunity. Stas Voronov, the former champion, never recovered mentally after that night in the shower. He withdrew into himself, quit sports. He was often seen in city parks, a huge, lumbering man feeding pigeons and crying for no reason. Valera Kozlov disappeared. They say he went north, changed his name, and worked there as a simple switchman, afraid to even look women in the eye. Retribution had been served. It was cruel, bloody, but absolute. And what about the investigation? The case of the Morgue Avenger landed on Investigator Sokolov's desk. He was supposed to dig to the ends of the earth. He was supposed to find that woman who swam across the river on a November night. He knew who she was. He had circumstantial evidence, motive, psychological understanding. But in his report, he wrote in dry, bureaucratic language. During operational search activities, it was not possible to establish the identity of the attackers. Evidence was destroyed by fire. Witnesses give conflicting testimony. Due to the impossibility of identifying suspects, the case is to be suspended. He stamped it and closed the folder forever. That evening, Nikolai Sokolov got drunk for the first time in many years. He drank vodka in his kitchen and thought about how there is the law written in codes, and there is the law of conscience. And sometimes these laws diverge. He had saved a murderer, yes, but he had also saved a mother. The life of Antonina and Lena flowed on its course. Quietly, inconspicuously, drably, Lena never married. The trauma inflicted on her that night proved too deep. She was afraid of men. She flinched from loud voices. But she found herself in music. She became a teacher at a music school. Children adored her. She gave all her unspent maternal love to other people's children. Antonina worked at the morgue for another 10 years, until her pension. She never picked up a scalpel again. She became devout. On Sundays, she was seen in a church on the outskirts of town. She lit 3 candles for the repose of living souls: Viktor, Stas, and Valeri. She prayed not for forgiveness for herself, but for God to take away the pain she had caused them. Antonina Petrovna died in 1965, quietly, in her sleep. Her heart simply stopped. Few people attended her funeral. Lena, a few neighbors, colleagues from the morgue. But as the coffin was lowered into the earth, a tall man in colonel's epaulets, with gray at his temples, approached the grave. It was Nikolai Sokolov. He placed a bouquet of red carnations on the mound, straightened up, and saluted. "Who is that?" Lena asked when he left. "That's a good man, dear," one of the neighbors answered. "The only policeman in town with a heart." This story never made it into the newspapers. It was scrubbed from official chronicles to avoid disgracing the honor of the Soviet system. But the legend lives on. In that closed town, they still tell a scary tale about the black morgue attendant who comes at night to those who harm the weak. And every time some puffed-up kid, confident in his daddy's connections, tries to cross the line, the old-timers say to him, "Stop, son. Don't stir up trouble. Justice sometimes holds a scalpel." Friends, this was a heavy but honest story. A story about what happens when the law goes blind and evil feels like the master. Antonina Makarova wasn't a hero. She was a murderer and an executioner. But she was a mother. Write in the comments honestly. Whose side are you on? Do you condemn her for taking the law into her own hands? Or do you believe that in a world ruled by connections and money, she had no other choice? What would you have done in Investigator Sokolov's place? Would you have turned her in or let her go as he did? I read all your comments, and your opinion matters very much to me. If this story moved you, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. We tell the truth they tried to hide. Click the bell so you don't miss the next investigation. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.